Until recently, they were helping refugees in Greece. Now, a group of aid workers is on trial, accused of spying and many other charges. But is this politically motivated, and what does it mean for aid work worldwide? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I am Hashem Ahelbarra. More than 24 aid workers from different nations are facing trial on the Greek island of Lesbos. They're accused of helping migrants reach Greece. Among them is a Syrian refugee, Sarah Mardini, who was granted asylum in Germany and is the sister of Olympic swimmer Yusra Mardini. The two came under international spotlight in 2015 when they dragged their boat to safety for kilometres when its engine failed. They all stand accused of spying, people smuggling and money laundering, among other charges. Some could face up to 25 years in prison. They say they were only helping other fellow humans.
I never for a moment thought that trying to help somebody out at sea would land you in prison, pre-trial prison for 3.5 months, and that one would also end up facing 25 years in prison. I'm terrified. I'm terrified of going back to prison. It is incredibly frightening. You know, when we were first in pretrial detention, you're held in pretrial prison, but you're innocent until proven guilty. I didn't see any of innocence or being treated like an innocent person.
Rights groups have condemned the trial, saying it's politically motivated. Human rights watchdog Amnesty International has called the trial farcical.
We are here to say how outraged we are that the Greek government is pursuing a criminal cases, charges against these people who did absolutely nothing wrong. Sarah and Sean are a typical case, an exemplary case of what's going on now in Europe. Dozens of people are being criminalized for doing the right thing, but is helping people in need, helping refugees and migrants in need. Greece must immediately drop the charges and let these two young people carry on with their lives.
We'll begin our discussion in a moment, but first let's go to John Saropoulos in Athens. John, how do the Greek people are reacting to this particular trial?
Well, at the moment, this isn't very well publicized. The news of this is not very widespread. There are other things like coronavirus claiming the limelight. But this is a story that's been ongoing since September 2018, when the indictments took place. There is awareness, very high awareness, among the humanitarian community and the aid community. And there the reactions are that people are appalled, because the Emergency Response Centre International was an aid group that was working very closely with authorities, including the Hellenic Coast Guard, the local authorities on Lesbos, the government. They had cleared all the hurdles in terms of registration with the government and following the regulations and the national law. So this indictment of all 30 of its members came a little out of the blue. I've spoken both then and more recently this year with the lawyer representing the group, who tells me that there were serious procedural problems with the way these indictments were handled. First of all, the names of individuals who were indicted were leaked to the press, which is a contravention of European privacy law and seems to shift the burden of proof onto individuals and away from the prosecutor before the trial even begins. There were leaked documents that are being included in the indictment, which is highly irregular. And then there is the problem that the inquisitor issued arrest warrants before the defendants had had an opportunity to make a first response. This is very unusual, I'm told, and it's done only in cases where there's a very serious flight risk on the part of the defendants.
Critics are saying that just by the very nature of the charges, particularly spying, could be an indication that the government is adamant about the need to further silence international aid organizations operating in Greece.
Well, as you know, those indictments back in September of 2018 were not the only ones against search and rescue operations. They were followed in September of 2020 by the indictment of another 4 groups, another 33 individuals, including groups that I've spoken to since then, who also say that they were absolutely honest with the Hellenic Coast Guard about their whereabouts and what they were doing. They usually operate vessels that place themselves deliberately in areas where refugee dinghies are expected to be found in order to alert the Hellenic Coast Guard to come and pick them up, or for the Hellenic Coast Guard to ask the Turkish Coast Guard to go and pick them up. They are simply there as spotters and facilitators. So they also were very surprised September of last year to be indicted. And they also have absolutely no idea what they've done wrong. And these are very serious charges that are being leveled. They're charges of trafficking and espionage, which could land people life imprisonment sentences. I've been told by the lawyer representing ERCI, Charis Petsikos, that looking into the evidence presented by the prosecutor, many of these charges don't really stand up. For example, one of the ERCI accused is Sarah Mardini, the swimmer from Syria, who was at the time 23 years old, volunteering with the ERCI. And he told me that on many of the times and dates when she is supposed to have been in Lesbos breaking the law, she was in fact in Germany applying to university. So there seem to be some serious problems with the case the government is bringing forward.
John, thank you. Let's bring in our guest in Lesbos, Giorgos Kosmopoulos, senior campaigner on migration at Amnesty International in Cambridge, Marianna Karakoulaki, journalist and researcher focusing on refugees and far-right movements in Greece. In Brussels, Pieter Cleppe is editor of Brussels Report.EU. Welcome to the program. Giorgos, you joined many other international human rights organizations describing the prosecution as absurd and farcical. Is it because of the very nature of the charges or because the proceeding itself is flawed?
Hi everyone. I just came out of the court, and I think it's both. But what is more important is farcical because of the things that they are accused of doing. Basically, what the Greek government is doing, the Greek authorities is doing, is taking people who are doing good work, necessary work, helping the authorities, helping the Coast Guard, and drag them through courts. I saw it time and again, and I saw some today, and unfortunately Sarah couldn't join, been criminalized for doing a good thing, and that should not stand. This trial I've witnessed today should have never, ever have happened.
Marianna, so what happened in between? These were aid workers operating in Lesbos, helping refugees. Now the government is saying, wait a second, there's something that has to be addressed. These people were involved in many, many charges.
So basically, the law when it comes to human trafficking is quite flawed because it cannot differentiate between solidarity and actual human trafficking. I think in this case we have a classic case of criminalization of solidarity that is quite widespread in the European Union. Why they're targeted in this way, I cannot say. I think they were just used as an example because in the past we have had several similar examples, but they were not targeted in such a strict way.
Pieter, many say this is a politically motivated trial. To what extent is the Greek government taking advantage of the divide within the European Union about migration to move forward with this aggressive stance?
Well, of course, it's a complex issue. I saw some of the charges include fake license plate, and then there's indeed very serious charges as well, like human smuggling and espionage. It's hard to, of course, as an outsider, to claim if these charges are justified or not. But to the extent that criminalizing aid workers is meant to sort of stop some of the problems and the miss situations over there. I don't think it's the right strategy to follow. I mean, the thing is that you have a thin line between human smuggling and putting your boat somewhere knowing that human smugglers would, abuse it. So I think it would be much more sensible for the Greek government to say, look, we know that you're willing to help, but you have to restrict your activities to these areas, because otherwise criminals will take advantage of your good intentions. That does not the strategy.
Giorgos, you've been at the trial. The general prosecutor must have his own justifications about the prosecution. Now, the case of Sarah Mardini, the Syrian refugee, and her sister, who dragged a boat to safety, celebrated by the international community as heroes, now are seen by the Greek authorities as criminals who might, particularly Sarah, who might spend many years behind bars.
I think no one should be convinced that Sarah Mardini is a criminal, because it's simply not. Sarah Mardini was someone who gave her private time, a lot of her personal time and a commitment to come here to Lesbos, where I stand, to help people in need. She was actually filling a gap together with Son and other rescuers, when very often the Coast Guard vessels or other vessels were actually calling upon them to help them with CPR training, with getting people out of the water. Sarah Mardini and the rest of the people should be celebrated. And let's not forget that Sarah, along with Son, for example, they spent 3 months in prison because the Greek authorities, thought they are at risk of flight. Now, I just came out of the courtroom and I was there, but Sarah could not be there because the Greek authorities won't let her travel to Greece to participate in her own trial. She wants to come here. She wants to show her face because she's done nothing wrong. I would say not only she's not done nothing wrong, she's done a lot of good, and she should be celebrated. And I think what I've seen today is the opposite of that. It's basically part of a wider trend across Europe to criminalize helpers, to criminalize aid workers. And at the end of the day, it has a very chilling effect, not only in Lesbos, but elsewhere. Everyone who's trying to help, everyone who's trying to act in solidarity might have to think twice in doing so. And this is not only a moral, but there's also a legal responsibility we have, according to European law.
Marianna, could this trial be an indication that the Conservative government in Greece, led by Kyriakos Mitsotakis, is adamant about the need not to repeat what happened in 2015 and 2016?
It's an example of the authoritarian nature of the government of Kyriakos Mitsotakis. And we have seen that everyone that is acting against the government's wills is criminalized. Even though the people who were arrested in 2018 were arrested before Kyriakos Mitsotakis, he seems to have exacerbated the power that the government has over the legal system. And this is quite problematic, to be honest. Every single person that does not agree with Kyriakos Mitsotakis is chased and targeted by an online herd of trolls. And in the end, they're being chased outside of the country, like the example of the Dutch journalist that asked Kyriakos Mitsotakis about pushbacks.
Pieter, are we likely to see European countries step in this particular case and say it's about time to give justice to the Emergency Response Centre International and the brave people who were working hard day and night to help refugees?
Well, I think this is all a desperate attempt to crack down on human smuggling. And indeed, I think we should put some question marks around some of the things that are happening there. Fundamentally, the question is, why do we have all that human smuggling in the first place? And on occasion, then human smugglers use aid workers for their purposes. The answer is, of course, easy to respond to. It's because if you are an asylum seeker and you want to request asylum in Europe, there's hardly any other route than to use human smugglers. So I think that has to change. For now, the EU's migration policies have not managed to improve much. on that front. I think fundamentally we need to look at very different approaches. The one currently explored by Denmark is actually quite interesting. The idea is that there's a deal with a third country where people can go, can apply for asylum. You would have sort of safe corridors from, refugee centers in crisis areas. So people no longer have to use human smuggling. Of course, it would also entail that if you illegally enter, then you would be brought to an offshore processing center. I know there's a lot of criticism on this. Australia has done it. It has made mistakes. The conditions there were very bad. But there were also some successes in the sense that the number of drownings from people trying to get into Australia has gone to virtually zero. So obviously we have to tackle both. We have to avoid that people risk their lives and drown at sea or are the victim of all these gangs. But also if they then are welcomed in a reception center, of course, the conditions have to be at high standards. They need to get an answer very quickly. They should not be there for too long. So yes, I think that's the route to follow.
Giorgos, Sarah Mardini, Sean Binder, and the other aid workers were traumatized by this experience and by the charges brought about by the court. What are the options for them now in the future?
Well, they have no option but to continue to fight on against these charges. These charges must be dropped. The Greek authorities must use the opportunity of the adjournment of today's trial to be tried by High Court to simply drop the charges. They don't have much offers. And let's look at the private cost of these people's lives. They are 25, 26 years old. They face the prospect of spending 25 years in prison, possibly the best years of their life, and they're still in limbo. What options do these people have? They're just put and crushed through a system which doesn't even allow them to come and face these absurd accusations. They'll have to fight. We as Amnesty are going to stand with them all the way because, as I said, this case is simply an example. It's very example of what's going on in Europe. And as far as Greece is concerned, it just goes to show how far the Greek authorities are prepared to go to criminalize aid workers and basically keep people off the source. And let's not all forget, it's not only about humanitarian aid. This chilling effect towards civil society have other effects. There are hardly any independent and observers at the coast of Lesbos, the coast of Lesbos, and we need observers. We need people to verify facts and to be there to offer help. So I do hope that Sarah and Sean, I'm sure, are going to fight on, but we need to fight with them. And I would like also to say something about the Danish and the Australian proposals because it's very pertinent to what has happened in Lesbos. I really don't think that's a good idea. Solving the problem by disappearing asylum seekers out of sight, it's hardly a solution.
Okay.
We need to allow access to people, give them a fair procedure, and by no means Europe has taken its fair share of asylum seekers and refugees. So the rest, I think, is excuses.
So migration is the very center of this particular case, Marianna. Now you have the top EU migration official saying that we need migrants because Europe is aging and we have to show solidarity. You have the Greek government saying, no, it's about time to clamp on the arrival of migrants, and the case of prosecution of those aid workers is a clear message. This divide itself, this disconnect, is it likely to further put more pressure on the migrants trying to reach Europe?
Migrants and asylum seekers will continue trying to reach Europe because they're escaping conflict zones. Those two differences between the European Union and Greece, I don't think it's actually a real difference because the European Union is fully aware about Greece's tactics and they seem to endorsing them, not publicly, but the fact that they are not stopping Greece from committing international law crimes is quite showing of its approach to migration. The European Union does not want refugees.
Pieter, one of the biggest problems here is the European stance itself when it comes to welcoming the refugees. And I think the most contentious issue in particular was, should every country be obliged to receive some refugees, something which has been dismissed by the Hungarians and by the Polish government. Is this the main reason why this is likely to continue deepening the divide between the European countries about migration?
Well, I think it's true that some of the things that we're seeing are the result of public opinion in Europe that is indeed very much against not so much migration and asylum seekers, but I would say disorderly migration flows, and especially the crisis in 2015, 2016 has really traumatized public opinion. So that's why I think it's very important for proponents of migration, and I include myself among them, especially I think Europe could definitely benefit from skilled migration happening in an orderly manner, while also obviously welcoming asylum seekers. I think if you're in favor of that, I think you should realize how important it is that it happens in an orderly way. And that's why I would like to see a lot more attention for the Danish, for the Australian model, which are not perfect, absolutely not, and definitely should be improved, but are absolutely not meant to avoid migration or avoid asylum seekers, but are meant to make sure it happens in an orderly manner. And this is, I can't stress how important this is. And actually the case of going after aid workers, like my colleague said, young workers that do this out of the good of their heart, is, I think, a symptom of how a traumatized public opinion can engage in desperate measures that are obviously not going to do much to help help with border protection, but are quite questionable.
Giorgos, we described the prosecution as farcical, but the environment itself in Europe, to what extent it has been conducive to what we're seeing now in Greece? Because when you look at the centre-right, it's embracing the same steps taken by the far-right. The far-right is now on the rise. You have a far-right TV pundit in France, Eric Zemmour, who said that immigration was a threat to the French identity. Is that environment responsible for those actions taken by countries, particularly by the Greek government?
Well, I think it's clear that has been a shift in some sections of the public opinion. I still don't think that the public opinion in Europe in general is hostile to migration, though we have to of course, be pragmatic and see that what happened in 2015 was not all perfect. And the real issue here is how to organize a system that is orderly, obviously, doesn't put people at risk, and that will begin by safe and legal routes. So there has to be that option on the table, which I think was mentioned already. It's not on the table. Refugees now, an asylum seeker cannot reach Europe through safe and legal routes. And what we need to do at the European level is have a system where refugees and migrants can be distributed evenly or fairly among member states. And we must insist that Hungary and the rest who are actually refusing to do so, they should really take in their fair share. Again, we are not going to go against this climate of xenophobia or racism by becoming more xenophobic ourselves or approaching the positions that they have been expressed. We really have to stand on ground. We really have to give the voice to the people who really want to see migration, who really want to have open society, who are welcoming refugees and migrants, and not falling the trap of shifting our views according to that, because there are also not only human rights obligations that need to be respected, but the things like core values of humanity is at stake here and Europe's heart.
Giorgos, Kosmopoulos, Marianna Karakoulaki, Pieter, Cleppe, I really appreciate your insight. Thank you. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com, for further discussion. Go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AGA Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AGA Inside Story. From me, Hashem, Ahelbarra, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.